Hi, this is Remembering the Past with Corey Franklin, the show where we talk about people who've died recently who've had a profound effect on our history, our society, or our culture. Tonight we're going to start out briefly with Marshall Lytle, who died at the age of 79, and he was the bass player for Bill Haley and the Comets. Here he is talking about his evolution with Bill Haley.
We're gonna tear down the mailbox, rip up the floor, smash out the windows, and knock down the door. We're gonna rock.
We were a cowboy band. There were four of us. Bill played the rhythm guitar and bass. Bill taught me how to slap the bass fiddle. And when I would sing, I would play the guitar and sing, and Bill would slap the bass. And then when Bill sang, I slapped the bass.
Of course, in 1954, Bill Haley and the Comets were responsible for one of the seminal records in rock and roll history. It wasn't the first rock and roll record, but it was as important as any record ever made in promoting rock and roll. It was Rock Around the Clock.
1, 2, 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock, rock. 9, 10, 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock, rock. We're gonna rock around the clock tonight.
The record didn't do that well in 1954, but it was used in the 1956 movie Blackboard Jungle with Glenn Ford, and from there it took off. Marshall Lytle tells the story of how they wanted to capture the sound of the mid-50s with Bill Haley and the Comets via Glenn Ford's son.
Glenn Ford and Richard Brooks were in their kitchen of Glenn Ford's home discussing the script. Young Peter Ford was in his bedroom playing records, and one of his favorite records was Rock Around the Clock. And he was playing it, and it filtered down into the kitchen, and Richard Brooks says, "That's the song. That's the one I want for this movie." And it became an instant hit worldwide.
That was Marshall Lytle, and we're going to move on now to Andrew Greeley, who died recently at the age of 85. Andrew Greeley was a nice Catholic boy from Chicago, Oak Park actually. He became a priest, and he became one of the most influential priests in America. He was a sociologist, he was a novelist, and he was a commentator. Through his books, his commentaries, and his newspaper articles, he commented on Catholicism and the changing nature of religion in today's society. He was outspoken, he was unafraid to criticize the Catholic Church, especially in things like the molestation scandals, and you can imagine how the church reacted to him. But he always maintained a Catholic viewpoint, and he was never a pessimist about Catholic influence. The television interviews always wanted to interview him on their pet topics, and here's the Huffington Post discussing their pet topic, his liberalism.
Celebrated author and outspoken Roman Catholic priest Andrew Greeley died on Thursday at the age of 85. His opinions on birth control and church authority rocked many of his colleagues. What do you think will be his lasting legacy?
Well, I just hope that, people remember that there was this kind of Catholic public intellectual that was not afraid to really critique both the Catholic hierarchy and also the secular world and really bring to bear the gospel on important questions. I want to read you the title of one of his last books, which was quote unquote, A Stupid, Unjust, and Criminal War, Iraq, 2001 to 2007. That was, one of his last books. So this is a guy who had a lot to say about things that were not just about abortion and homosexuality. In fact, he was actually complicated the abortion question, complicated the homosexuality question. So he was a great public intellectual, a novelist, had 50 novels, and a column that people read around the country. In fact, someone said he was a parish priest, but all of those who read his column were his parishioners.
A fitting tribute.
Here he is in an interview on the status of women.
Joining us today is one of the most influential Catholic thinkers and writers of our time, best-selling author, Father Andrew Greeley. His latest book, Jesus, a meditation on his stories and his relationships with women, examine the many parables told by Jesus. Father Greeley, welcome, and thank you for joining us today.
I'm glad to be here. I always like to talk about my books.
Do the parables have a universal theme?
If we didn't know that Jesus was extraordinary from our faith, that he was unique among humans, we would know it from these stories because they're all so categorically different from the stories that are told about other men.
You talk about Jesus' attitudes towards women. Can you tell us how Jesus felt about women?
Jesus delighted in women. He liked them, he admired them, he loved them, and he respected them. The book not only is about the stories Jesus told, but about the stories told about Jesus. And the stories told about Jesus' relationship with women are almost as unbelievable as his parables, given the era in which he lived, when women were treated with contempt, when they were definitely inferior human beings. They could be bought and sold. And any wise person, such as Socrates, for example, was very critical of women. But Jesus never said a harsh word about them, never said a harsh word to them. He traveled with women in his entourage, equal with his apostles. Jesus was a radical feminist by the things he did and the things he said. Did he find Mary Magdalene sexually attractive? How could he not have? I mean, he was a male member of the human species. He was more than that, but our doctrine says he was human in all things except sin. And finding members of the opposite gender, or even of the same gender, sexually attractive is not necessarily a sin.
As a Catholic woman, I enjoyed that you said that if Jesus chose to be married and be a father, it wouldn't have changed who he was.
No, Jesus was free. He was as free as any human. He had a mission. He had a destiny. And he decided at some point that that destiny was incompatible with having a family, as others of us have decided since then. But that doesn't mean this was something God forced him to do any more than he forced me to be a celibate. It was a matter of free choice for Jesus. I'm glad, Laura, as a Catholic woman, you like the book. Good. I have one reader.
So did Jesus' views of women conform to the time?
People in general were baffled by him, and he was a troublemaker. He's often presented in some of the mass media versions of him as a sweet and humble person. Jesus wasn't sweet. He wasn't humble. He was tough.
Do you think the people of Jesus' time got the meaning of his stories?
I don't know how they reacted. I do know that he got crucified for telling his stories, so I think some people were infuriated by them.
As you say in your book, God is a God of paradox.
Yeah, but he's a God of surprises, and surprises keep coming, and they're not finished when we die.
Well, thank you very much, Father Greeley. Appreciate all of your time. And
I enjoyed the conversation.
Well, Andrew Greeley was a tough guy, too, and he took a lot of guff. He didn't get crucified, but he got a share of criticism, and the surprises kept coming from him, too. We're going to make a brief mention of Clarence Burke, who died at the age of 64. Clarence Burke was the lead singer of the Five Stairsteps. They were a black group right out of here in Chicago, so named because the 5 children resembled stair steps when they stood together. They didn't have a lot of hits, but they had one big hit in 1970, and this hit was all over the radio. You couldn't help but hear it wherever you were, and it's a good song, and he was the lead singer on it. Here they are, introduced on Soul Train by Don Cornelius, who we've done a podcast on.
That fantastic Burke family returns now with a promise of a better life for all. Let's welcome back the Stairsteps.
Oh, child, things are gonna be easier. Oh, child, things will be brighter. Oh, child, things are gonna be easier. Oh, child, things will be brighter.
As I said, you couldn't help but hear that song in the summer of 70. Yeah, that was Clarence Burke. A lot of good music came out of the south side of Chicago in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. It was overshadowed to an extent by Motown and Philadelphia, but the Stairsteps were a good example of Chicago soul. We're going to close tonight with our feature, Jean Stapleton, who died at the age of 90. Jean Stapleton, a.k.a. Edith Bunker, created one of the most memorable characters in television history on one of the most memorable television shows. The show was CBS's All in the Family. It was groundbreaking. It was #1 for 5 years in a row in the 1970s. Not only did it deal with social issues, it was just a great, funny show. But it was more than just a funny show. It was a love story between Carroll O'Connor's Archie Bunker and Jean Stapleton as Edith.
Edith?
Yeah?
Why are you cooking garments?
Glory is boiling one of Mike's shirts. The dye in it was giving him a rash.
Why don't she burn him instead? Dye. Give me something to take the taste out of my mouth. What'd you make him? Instant coffee?
No, it's fresh perk.
It tastes like instant.
It's fresh perk, though.
It's fresh perk, but it tastes like instant.
I heard you, but it's fresh perk.
I accept it. It's fresh perk.
But it tastes like instant, huh?
You're a pip, you know that? A real pip.
The writing was great. The acting was even better.
Oh, I know. We'll talk about the family.
I hate the family.
I meant your family.
That's who I meant.
Oh, I know, Archie. Let's talk about the good old days.
Jean Stapleton was a consummate New York theater actor. She'd been in Damn Yankees and The Bells Were Ringing in the late 50s. She'd done some television commercials, as a lot of the actors would do in those days. Another thing they did were television series that were based out of New York. She was unwittingly paired up with Carroll O'Connor in the early 1960s in one episode of The Defenders.
And the actor who was playing that role was Carroll O'Connor. But then I never saw him again until years later. This is in the series. Carroll is a very fine actor. Great versatility. Norman saw him in something. He was perfect. Couldn't have been better.
That Norman was Norman Lear, who had the idea to adapt a British television show, Till Death Do Us Part, which had a similar theme of a bigoted husband and a lovable, understanding wife, and transfer it to American television set in Queens, dealing with contemporary social issues. But the show wouldn't work without the great acting ensemble he put together. Here, Jean Stapleton talks about the early days of the show.
My agent called me to come up and see Norman Lear about this part in a series. I had never done a series. Norman said that he'd seen me in Damn Yankees. That's how I came to his attention. And I remember reading the script, which was the script, basic script for 3 pilots and the first show on the air. I was just amazed by its quality. Really good script. Character, comedy based in character and situation and so forth. And I thought to myself, wow, this on TV, how wonderful. It was very honest and very funny and uncovering a lot of bigotry and prejudice and nonsense. And it was wonderful. It was real life, and it was true, and it was contemporary, and brought up issues, too. I love that. ABC dropped it, the pilot it had, and CBS picked it up. And Norm came along and said, "It looks like we've been picked up." He said, "But don't celebrate until you're there in the studio making it." Nothing is certain. Very, very bright, very creative, always pushing you further than what you think is your best work. Always. He was very much the captain of the ship.
Here she talks about how she created the character of Edith and how brilliant she was as an actress in doing that.
She just had a zinger about one line a page that just broke his hot air every time. It was a laugh. So I think I said it in quite a wry and wise manner, knowingly. A zinger. Burst his bubble. And that's the way I played the pilots, and which became the first show. The character evolved in the first 13 weeks, as it did for all of us. I didn't even use the nasal quality in my voice in that first reading. But of course, when we got into rehearsal, the fact that we were in New York, where I knew everybody hurried, and the abusive demands on Bunker's part pushed Edith into a run. She was hurrying to get things on the table, etc. That's how the little run became a part of the character. And I added the nasality because I had used it in Damn Yankees for the woman. For comic purposes, I thought, well, I'll give her that nasality. I'll steal it from myself. A very compassionate individual. A peculiar way of arriving at things and thoughts. Not very bright, not well educated, and a perception about people that was instinctive, intuitive. And sometimes it was very, very sharp understanding. She went right to the root of something. Just a lot of love, unselfish love.
Well, as I said, she was a theater actress at heart, and if you watch All in the Family, you can see that it's almost a staged theatrical production. It was transitional between television of the 50s and 60s, where they were coming off the theater, and the 80s and 90s of today, where there's little vestige of theater left.
It was like doing theater, and I was very comfortable in that. That laughter just feeds you as an actor, and it was just a wonderful thing to do. It was like stepping into almost theater. And if something was not in character, we were allowed to discuss it and then go back and fix it. Wonderful free theater.
Well, in that respect, I'm going to play a 2-minute clip of what I think is one of the best examples of the theater between Archie and Edith. It's not one of those controversial things. It's just flat-out dialogue, and it's wonderful. Possibly my favorite moments between the two of them, and it gives you an idea of what the character of Edith was all about.
Wait a minute, nobody ate nothing around here. Can I find out what went wrong at the supermarket? Now, come on, get it.
Well, I knew you liked clean pizza.
Yeah, I heard that before.
And heavy syrup.
Yeah, I heard that too.
I know. Why don't you tell me how much I've told you so far, then I'll know where to begin.
You ain't told me nothing so far except clean peaches, which is coming out of my ears. Now, don't say them two words no more, huh? Start your story after the clean peaches and get on with it.
Well, Archie, I had an accident with a car.
What?
Oh, are you all right?
Did you get hit?
I didn't get hit. I hit the car. Oh, you don't drive.
Yeah, and even if you do, we don't have a car. How did you hit a car?
Well, that's where the... told me never to say those two words.
What are you trying to tell me? That you hit a car with a can of clean peaches?
That's right. You see, I was coming out of the market with my shopping basket full of... And there was Mrs. Duncan with her new baby. I took a peek in the carriage, but I couldn't see the baby too well. He was all swinged up.
Will you get on with the story?
Anyway, I knew I had to say something nice about the baby, so I went, "Oh, isn't that a beautiful baby?" And when I went, "Oh," the shopping basket got away from me, rolled down the hill and smashed into this parked car and scratched the fender. And then this can of... in heavy syrup jumped out and made a big dent in the hood. It was a freak accident.
You don't get much better television than that. Even Jean Stapleton didn't realize how good it was at the time.
I never watched the show thereafter. But now, with all this time that has elapsed, I can watch totally objectively. I love it.
She left the series after 8.5 years, and here's the discussion she had with Norman Lear when they wanted to kill off the character.
Norman called, and he said that he could not say yes to allow Edith to die, you see, in a script, so that Archie could get on with his life. So I said to Norman, "Norman, you realize, don't you, she is only fiction." There was a long pause. And I thought, I've heard this dear man that I love so much. And then the voice came back, "To me, she isn't."
And of course, the reason that Edith Bunker wasn't a fictional character to Norman Lear is because of the great talent of Jean Stapleton. I'm going to close on that note. I want to thank my producer, Sid Tepps. And what else can we close with but the theme song from All in the Family, where she sang with Carroll O'Connor about the old days, Glenn Miller, and Nat LaSalle in her shrill nasal voice.
Boy, the way Glenn Miller played.
Songs that made the hit parade.
Guys like us, we had it made.
Those were the days. And you knew where you were then.
Girls were girls and men were men.
Gee, our old LaSalle ran great. Those were the days.
You had no right to leave me that way. Without giving me just one more chance. Shane, I love you.